The seller has got to tell you whether there is one or not, and if it is working. Um, and if it's working, the seller has to clearly post a visible notice at the entrance so that the buyers can see it when they enter the property. The way that this all started, it's probably been a couple of years or so. Um, Sellers are listening in on what goes on in their homes, and
Oh,
some of these cameras and these audio devices are, the size of a pin. So the story that I heard is a listing agent was showing his own listing, and he said something as he was talking to the buyers walking through the house, and his phone rang and he answered it. It was the seller, and the seller said, "Why did you tell them that?"
mm,
So,
wow. Yep.
so the good practice is to, when you, and this is working with buyers, is when you pull up to a house, don't have any conversation except, the typical standard kind of things like, well, is the refrigerator included, or, what about the ceiling fans, or, but don't make any comments, don't negotiate while you're in the house. And when you leave, get in the car, drive away, and then have the conversation, because you don't know how far this will pick up any voice.
Wow. Okay.
So just tell the buyers, it's just, you don't want to talk about it, and, so, okay. Now, 16 is unusual because it happens, but it's up to, I guess, the office and how you're going to handle it. If you've been under contract and you have an escrow deposit, if the deposit is forfeited, one half is paid to the seller and one half is paid to the broker as compensation. Okay? So when I was talking about, this is where if you have a large
Mm,
deposit, this is where you get paid. But again, it's going to be up to the broker to discuss how they want to handle that. Okay.
okay.
Okay. Um, you know, some of these other things on the broker authorization, um, regarding advertising, um, regarding the multiple listing service. Now, D is confusing for a lot of agents here. Um, all this has to do with is the multiple listing service. All right, this is when virtual offices started to appear, and no, they didn't have brick and mortar um, buildings. So this has been in effect for a while. So what we've done is, you will find when you get these forms that the answer to A is always yes. It's already embedded with an X. B is always yes. C and D are embedded with the answers no. And what this is the seller doesn't authorize the AVMs, the automatic valuation of the property, even though, like Zillow puts it on there, it's not right. They don't care that it's not right, but we're not authorizing it on the MLS. And D is, this is referencing blogging, but on the MLS. This is not, if you're a blogger about, your business activities and trying to promote the property, that's fine. This just references the MLS system. And where this came about is, you don't, the next door neighbors are not friends of the sellers, and they go on and are able to blog by saying, they got 15 kids, they're up all night, they're partying all the time. That's the kind of thing that is not supposed to be in the MLS. Okay,
Mm,
so D just is about the MLS service, nothing about anything you do as a licensee. Okay. Um, You can read through most of these obligations. They're
Mhm.
pretty self-explanatory. They're nothing that we don't do anyway. Um, okay. You know what fair housing is? Um, heirs and assigns is this agreement is binding upon the heirs, personal representatives, successors, and assigns. So, um, in the sales agreement, that's harder to do. This automatically does. Um, Now, in the addendas, um, you need to have these checked if you're going to uh, include these. Now, you're going to have a seller's disclosure, so
Mhm.
you're going to have that checked. You're going to have a lead-based paint. You're going to have a radon. You probably won't have the DeKalb recertification form because the seller's probably going to want to wait and do that when they get the offer. You're going to have a consumer information sheet. You may have a septic certification if the house is on a septic system. Um, you may have some other things, but I wouldn't go too far in putting those things necessarily in the listing agreement. Okay. Now, paragraph 21 is where you could write the property description. Um, there's enough room to write it in here. If you wanted to write it on a blank addendum, you could do that as well. Um, okay. 23 is the seller acknowledges that they have read, fully understand the contents to the agreement, listing agreement, and they acknowledge receipt of a copy. So down at the bottom, this has the broker's acceptance. So from my understanding, you are now allowed to sign that as the broker representative.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So when if you're doing an in-person listing agreement and they list with you, you're going to have a second copy with you because they're acknowledging that they get a receipt of that listing agreement.
Mhm.
If you're doing it electronically, um, you know, they will have a copy of it when they sign it. So, um, but whether you put the broker signature on it or not, that could be after the fact. It tells us that a fax, an electronic record, or a photocopy is considered an original. So we're covered on all of our electronics. Okay. Um, Now, again, before you went to list the property, you probably pull the public records to see whose names are on the public record.
Mhm.
Because 24 says that they are certifying that they're authorized to transfer the property. If you have an estate, this is where you're going to need to see that the estate paperwork from the attorney or from whoever prepared it for the seller, because in that, probably in the power of attorney, unless it specifically states that that seller can dispose of real property, you probably don't have an authorized person. So, you're just going to have to make sure that they're authorized.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So date and signed and the broker acceptance. Now here's the effective date. Um, so you need to put in there what that effective date is. If you're getting pictures taken professionally, it might be a week. In paragraph 21, you could put in there that this listing will be effective in 7 days after professional photography is done. So, you know why you're putting in an effective date that's later than probably the date they signed it.
Now, what holds water, the date they signed it as far as it's my listing or the effective date?
The effective date.
So,
Well,
so if I wait a week and put effective date in a week, and they can just go somewhere else in a week, correct? Within that.
yeah, I mean, they could, but, you know,
So you're not really locking them in though if you put two.
no, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, do people usually put effective date the same day as signing or no?
If that's the date that it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So um, that's the listing agreement. Okay. Um, always look down here at the bottom, and these are always going to be from the Delaware Association of Realtors. And you look at the last modified date. Um, you'll get used to seeing these dates, but make sure you've got one that's the most current.
Okay.
Lately, we've seen, because agents will make a copy of something, put it in their file, and then never update them. We got one recently where it was 2013. So,
Oh, okay.
you're getting a lot of, you're basically having your client sign something that may or may not be even in there anymore. So,
Yeah, right. Okay.
okay. All right. Let me see. Okay. Um, we're just going to move on to the next one, and this is the seller's disclosure. So this is in for resale property. You are not supposed to help the seller with this. You're supposed to give it to them. You're supposed to let them answer it to the best of their ability. And right in the middle, it says it's a good faith estimate by the seller. Okay. Um, when you see this again, um, they're supposed to answer the questions as yes, no, or in the star where they can either write unknown or NA.
Okay.
Okay. Um, they need to fill this out in its entirety, um, filling in all the blanks. I didn't put all 7 pages in here because it's basically all the same
Right. Got it.
information. Um, Now, what I do when I get it back from the seller is I review it. If it's not filled out, or if it's, if they answered unknown to everything, they could, especially if they're occupying the property, there's no reason why they don't know about the house. I'll have a conversation with them and try and get a better seller's disclosure done, because I'm of the opinion that the reason that they're doing this is for the buyer to at least see something before making an offer, and it gives them some insight into the house.
Mm-hmm.
So if the seller hasn't made that attempt, I try and get them to do it again. If they, one of the agents in the office had a neighbor that electronically they just couldn't do it. And I just said, finally, I said, fine, take it to the seller, read them the question, and let the seller answer it. If, if, does the house have fuses or does it have circuit breakers? If the seller doesn't know, then I said, take them over to the electric box and show them.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's, I guess it's up to you on how much, you feel that this information is beneficial to the next person looking at it. So, I try to do my best and have it correct. So, and it definitely, if there's some wrong answers, then you want to, figure out why the seller said that and, get it fixed. Keep switching to blue here. Okay. Now, one thing that's required, and electronically you might not have an issue, but the property address is required on every one of these forms. It should autofill, but if it's not, you need to put it in there, because this form will get, when you submit for compliance, it'll get returned because you don't have the address on it. Okay. Seller signs it. Now, this line, the date of the contents of this report were last updated. Initially, when you're doing the listing, this is blank. This is not the day you're signing the seller's disclosure. It's only after you've got the listing that you would to fill in a date here because something changed in the seller's disclosure. So technically, there won't be anything in here up front. Okay. We've gone through what the acknowledgement to the buyer is when the buyer signs it. So, all right, are you good on a resale seller's disclosure?
Yep.
Okay. Just want to show you this. This is a seller's disclosure of exempt property. Okay. Under Delaware code, there are 8 instances that the seller's disclosure does not have to be done. Okay. And what it says here is if this is the case, you need to circle either one, whatever number applies. Okay. The one that is always confusing is number 4. And this is a sheriff's sale. Up until the time of the sheriff's sale, this is an exempt property. But at the sheriff's sale, for instance, if the lender gets the property back, then this is no longer an exempt property. So we're dealing with an out-of-state lender. They're probably not going to fill out the 127 questions, but you at least have to tell them that it's Delaware law and, they still refuse to do it. You just note somewhere on that seller's disclosure that the lender refused to sign it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you just need to know, what you're dealing with in order to exempt your property from a seller's disclosure. Okay. All right. One last seller's disclosure, and this is for new construction only.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, it's the same kind of information, except it's only 5 pages. You're going to get a whole lot of different types of questions because the property's not occupied. So what happens in most of the time on this, unless you've got a spec builder or, an individual that built a house, you're going to be dealing with a national builder or a builder that builds more than one house a year. They're already going to have this done. Okay, so you're not going to have to worry dealing with a builder. The only thing that you would have to worry about is if, for instance, the builder had a spec house or had a house, was going to go to settlement today, and it fell through, and they've got the certification, they've got the occupancy certification. Okay, because they would have had to have had that, so at settlement they can transfer the property and the new owners can occupy. That's where the builder can no longer use the new construction seller's disclosure. Once they have the CO, they have to now do the full 127 question seller disclosure. Okay.
Can you go over that one more time?
Okay. This is for new construction only.
Right. So the builder has to fill this out, right?
Right. Right.
Okay.
So today was settlement on a property. It fell through. The builder got the CO a couple days ago or got it today.
Right.
So that the new buyer could occupy the property.
Right.
In a fall through, that builder can no longer use this new construction seller's disclosure. They've now got to redo and do the full 127 question one because they've got the CO.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, this is like if I was representing the builder, correct?
Well, no, for the buyer too. If you're representing the buyer and they're trying to use the new construction.
Right. Okay.
But you know that they got the CO.
Okay.
previously. They should be filling out. You're probably going to have a hard time getting them, but you at least have to ask for it.
Mhm.
So, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, we haven't gone over this yet, but this is our lead-based paint form. Um, I don't know whether you've seen this one or not. It's the, it's just one page. It's a little confusing because this box over on the left-hand side where it has seller's instructions, it's you have to check the box of the age of the property and initial it. So over here on the right is when was the dwelling constructed? Prior to 78, after 78, or they don't know.
Mhm.
Okay, so they're going to check either, you know, they're going to check one of the boxes.
Mhm.
Then what it says over here is if you check box number 2, which is after the lead-based paint date, it
Mhm.
says the form is complete. Well, this form's been bastardized a number of times, and that's technically, the form is not complete. The seller's section is complete.
Okay.
All right, so the seller's section is just right here, A and B. Okay,
Mhm.
so obviously they're gonna, if they checked 2 up here that after January 1st, 78, then they're probably not gonna answer this. If they answer it, they're gonna answer no. Okay,
Mhm.
all right, so then the next section involves the purchaser. So all purchasers must initial these 5 boxes. Okay, and it's getting any of the information that was checked by the seller, getting the pamphlet, and then do they want to test the house or do they want to waive the test? So they've got to do something in this part. Okay, the agent's acknowledgement is the listing agent. Okay, and the listing agent says that they have informed the seller of the seller's obligation under the US code, and the seller is aware of their responsibility. Now, what it does up in the top is in the lead-based paint warning, this is what the seller is aware of, and then checking the right box. What the US code says is if this form is not filled out in its entirety, I think it's a $10,000 fine. Okay. Then it's asking for a certification of accuracy, and now it's asking that all parties involved in the transaction sign it. You've got the sellers, you've got the purchaser, and you've got the agents for both, depending on which side you use. So in Delaware, we've got brokers that say if the house is built after 1978, they're not even going to do the form. The agents are not going to sign the form. What we need to do as Keller Williams agents is we need to ask the agent and explain it that our company is doing the form in its entirety, and we would ask that everybody comply and sign it. We're not going to hold up a transaction if you can't get the other parties to sign it. The seller is already going to have signed it, so that's okay. And the buyer would do as if they're making an offer. The agent may be the issue. So, all you can do is ask, and if they won't comply, then you would just make a note on here as I asked the other agent 3 times and they refused to sign. And that's all you can do. Okay?
Yep. Got it.
Okay. Moving along, the radon. Um, uh, there is a pamphlet, or I'm sorry, one sheet of paper that describes what radon is. All this disclosure says is, does the seller know that there's radon on the property? Have there been any tests done on it? And if there were, do they have paperwork? And then anything else that they want to see. It really doesn't say a whole lot. I think where the importance of this is more working with a buyer is to give them what radon, the explanation. It's the one page of what radon is and what it can do. I would suggest that you as a licensee not answer the questions like um, from a buyer. Um, well, is there lead-based paint? I'm sorry, is there radon in Sussex County? You don't know every place that there's radon. I could have it at my house, the next door neighbor could not have it. So, you don't want to get into answering those kinds of questions. I think where the whole issue of showing them what radon is that it causes cancer. And, just so that they understand that, you don't want to be responsible. And, um, it's just not a good thing to even get into. Just give them the paperwork, let them read it, then let them make the choice.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yep.
So here's the radon rights, risks, and remedies. That's the one page. That's the most important out of all of this. Okay. Now, if there were radon done in the house, then the seller is going to have all of that because they're going to have to make that known anyway. Okay. Okay. This is in Sideways. This is a flow chart for common interest communities in Delaware. It's just you have to follow just follow the arrows of where you're going. Most of what we deal with are on the right-hand side of the page in planned communities. Then you get into, well, when was the community created? Before before 09 or after 09, then you just kind of have to follow the arrows. But the most important thing in here is right here is a date, and it's always going to be July 1, and it's, oh, this is the wrong form. Sorry about that. This is updated every year on July 1. And what happens is the amount of money for a planned community started at $500. It's now up to $652.38. And the reason that that's an odd amount is every July 1, this increases by 3%. So usually the question about asking is, well, does the community fit? If the amounts are over $652.38, most likely it does. And that's a yearly unit, a yearly amount. So, this is just to help you flow through whether or not you need to do the Kiowa addendums or not. Okay. Okay. Then speaking of the common interest community resale certification, this is the one-page certification. And what it does is it states up here that the seller may be involved in Kiowa. And this is the standard clause that you would put in an agreement of sale for a buyer if the seller doesn't have the resale certification, is that the seller is required within 10 days of the ratification of an agreement of sale to furnish the buyer with all the documents relating to the Kiowa. And that's usually done by the management company or the community association, could be done by the attorney. That's the standard language. Now,
before you go, what's an example of that planned community down there in Delaware? Say
most all of them are.
Most all of them more.
Most all, anybody that has an HOA fee, anybody that has a condo and HOA fee combined, they all fall under this.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Um, so the next paragraph is after the buyer gets the documents, the buyer has 5 days to review it and then can withdraw from the agreement of sale for no reason. They just don't like what's written. Now, what's the alternative is on this form is the seller decides to get the resale certification done right up front, right at the beginning of the listing. This follows the same guideline as the seller's disclosure, is if the seller discloses it in writing on the seller's disclosure, the buyer has to ask the seller to do something when they're making an offer. If they don't, the seller's disclosed it, the buyer can't reopen that particular thing. They'll have a home inspection done and the home inspector will say, this might need to be looked at. If the seller disclosed it up front, the buyer can't ask for it to be looked at again. This is the same thing. This eliminates the buyer from withdrawing, as it says up here, after they review the documents, because they would be probably reviewing that before they made the offer. And if something in the documents that they were bothered by it, they probably wouldn't make the offer. So what the thing of it is here is the certificate is only good for 120 days. So if you were to go over 120 days, the seller's got to get another certification and they're going to have to pay for that update. So, it's just something to discuss with the seller of whether they want to do it up front and then have the buyer make the offer and then not be able to withdraw.
Now, is this an expensive thing that the certification? They have to do it, right?
They have to do it. It's usually $300 to $500.
So the seller has to do this regardless.
Yes.
The only step in there is if it's not sold within 120 days, they have to go back and redo it.
Right. Which the update to the original might only, might be 50, 100, it won't necessarily the full cost, although it could.
Now, just a question for you is, why wouldn't a seller want to do this just to get it done?
Because they don't want to pay the money up front.
Just up front, okay.
Yeah, if it doesn't sell in the 120 days, then they got to get another one, and they might be tight on money.
Okay, but the seller always is responsible for producing this, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yep. And pay for it.
And this is all done through the whatever the HOA is?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's on the seller's disclosure. There's a whole section about who's the management company. That's usually who does it.
So the seller is paying that management company to do the certification?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then normally what you're going to get is you're going to get an email with an attachment. They've got all these records already uploaded, but it can be hundreds of pages depending on what community it is.
Yeah.
And the buyer's got to get that and read it all.
Now, what if it's a new construction? Same thing?
No, because the new construction is going to get all of the documents that the builder's already got about the setup of the property.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Now, hold on a second. Okay. Let me go back one. So the regular addendum I just lose one? Oh, okay. Um, those first two paragraphs in that one page, that's what the standard addendum is, that if you were working with a buyer, that's what you would put in it. For some reason, I can't find it.
Why don't you try to go back to slide 7, see if you can do that one.
Nope, that's the,
No. Oh,
I
yeah,
don't know what happened to 8 and 9,
yeah.
unless I hit the wrong button. All right, well, all it did is it just repeats those two paragraphs for your buyer to sign.
Okay.
Okay, ABA for sellers. All this is just a disclosure. It says disclosure of affiliated businesses that are connected to Keller Williams. Okay. Um, you've already discussed agency with them. And what it is saying in here basically is a home warranty. We've got several companies that are affiliated. The seller doesn't have to buy a home warranty, but there are some people, some sellers that will do a home warranty up front for the buyers. The broker fee, you've already discussed this with them. So, this is just disclosing who Keller Williams has relationships with. Okay.
Up here, I think that we call that a RESPA up here.
I came from Maryland, and we always called it affiliated businesses. So,
Okay.
RESPA might fit, but, same kind of thing. The buyer's ABA is a little different because it talks about like Betty Krug in the Lewis office. She also has a settlement company that does mobile home settlements. So she's an employee of Keller Williams, but she also does the settlements on the side. So that has to be disclosed. So all this is just telling people who's affiliated.
Yeah, and that goes for mortgage companies too, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Is Keller Williams down there affiliated with a mortgage, like Movement Mortgage or anybody?
Yes, we are. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And also Keller Mortgage.
Keller okay.
Yep. Okay. Now, if you ever were to do a mobile home on leased land, and this addendum is only if it's on leased land, okay? Most of the agents will do this addendum from the seller because what it does is it sets in here what the seller wants. In number one is the buyer will make the application to the community within so many days. The seller wants this thing to get going and wants the buyer to be approved. So, they try to fill this in if they can. Then when if the buyer can't get the information, as short as can be, the buyer gets to review the information. That's short. The one thing that's different with mobile homes compared to resales is mobile homes are considered motor vehicles. So you do a motor vehicle documentation instead of a transfer tax. So on the motor vehicle transfer, it's 3.75% of the purchase price. But what we do here in 3 is it's saying that that's split equally between the buyer and the seller. Okay. So a lot of listing agents like to have this already uploaded into Bright so that when the buyer goes to make the offer, they know what they're getting into, right, with the mobile home. Okay?
Mhm.
Okay.
Now, real quick, like the community could say, we don't like the history of this buyer, correct?
Well, what they do is they do, most of them down here, I think a company in Chicago, or it's out of state, they do credit checks.
Credit check, okay.
They do,
Do any profile? Can they profile or no?
no, they can't do, because they can't discriminate.
Right.
But what they do the credit report, and they also do a background check.
A background check, okay.
Yep. So they're getting information that they need. And parks do not approve some people. So, you know, but that's what number one is they um, make that application and get that process going. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Now, this is the as is addendum, and this is a pretty good addendum. Because if you didn't have this, for instance, you've got a seller that actually doesn't want to do any repairs. Maybe they don't have any money. Not saying that there's something wrong with the property, but if you were to put in the remarks that property is being sold as is, you'd have to say seller will do no repairs, or, you know, buyer is at their own risk. What this does is this gives the buyer, or actually the seller, two choices. They're selling it as is without inspections. So they, right up front, the buyer knows that there are no inspections. Or it's as is with inspections, and then the right to terminate. Because what happens is they have a home inspection, or they have a contractor come in to look at structure. If we just go that the seller will allow you to have the house inspection, but it'll do no repairs,
Mhm.
usually the buyer can't get out of it. But what they're saying in the second part is they can do it, and they can terminate the agreement if they find out that it's just too much, you know, wrong, or whatever they were looking at just doesn't work. So this is a pretty good addendum to use when you see in a listing the property is sold as is. And you may be able to ask the listing agent, when you see that, why is it being sold as is? They may tell you, they may not. So, you know, you're kind of at a disadvantage, but at least this way, with this addendum from the seller saying what they would allow. Okay.
Now, if for most cases, do they put the second choice there with the right to terminate?
It depends. I mean, it's up to the seller. I mean,
Well, the buyer would obviously know this piece of information before putting the deal in, correct?
Correct.
An offer.
Right. And
Right, so he knows that if somebody checks that as is without inspection,
yeah,
the buyer knows he's taking a risk,
yep,
right?
Yep.
Okay.
yep, yep. Or, you know, in our home inspection is the buyer has it done. They prepare a report of requests for repairs, and the seller then agrees to do them or not do them. Well,
Mhm.
this is where this as is without inspections, they're not doing anything. So you're
Well,
right.
they're not doing anything, but also they're saying to the buyer, you can't terminate it if
Right.
there's
Correct.
terminates or whatever.
Yep.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why the second one is it's a little easier. It's all, you know, it says in here deposits are returned. You know, the seller's only off the market maybe for a couple weeks,
Right.
because you're going to do this rather quickly.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, that's a pretty good addendum. The buyer is responsible for all of this. Um, this first sentence is any damage to the property the buyer is responsible for. I think depending on what the interest of the buyer is, if it were structural and maybe they needed to, you know, get in a wall or get behind a closet or something, that might be a discussion with the seller before they would start going to do something like that. So, I guess it depends on what the buyer's interest is. Okay. So that's the as is addendum. Okay. All right. Remember I was saying that Form 5403 for the capital gains. This is from the Delaware Division of Revenue. And this, 1, 2, and 3 are pretty easy. Look at 5 and 6. Somebody has to do this figuring and do all of this. That person should not be you.
Okay.
This is where you give the form to the seller, tell them to take it to their attorney or their accountant, and you're out of it. And if they come to settlement and they haven't done this, then number F is, you see the 6.6%. That's what the attorney's going to take out of their proceeds. So, you don't want them coming to settlement. And there's an instruction page on the second page that they can take to whoever they want to take it to. Okay?
And this is only for out-of-state owners.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. If somebody is selling a property that lives in Delaware and they're staying in Delaware, they're fine, or buying another house, they're fine. This is just, you live out of state and you're not buying another house to live here. So, okay. So we had an agent right when this form came out that sat down with the seller and was trying to figure it out. And halfway through called me up and said, how do I do this, this, and this? This is not something you just don't want the liability for you. Okay. Okay. That's basically, other than, I didn't put in here if you're the listing agent, you need to request the escrow check when you're getting ready to go to settlement. You're going to probably have pay at the table unless you're going to have it directly deposited into your bank account. But you've set that up with Betty already, or with Charlene. So, okay, so that's basically the listing process.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions that you might have at this point?
Well, you're going to send this to me, correct?
Yeah.
Just
And
like that?
there's a few more pages with it also.
Okay.
So,
That'll give me a chance to review it real well.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a little, when we do this in a classroom, it's a little easier, but, and usually you've got a copy of it. So,
Right.
and
It worked.
Go ahead.
It worked fine. I was,
All right. You've been signing up for a lot of classes. I didn't know you were here today, or I would have gotten you that presentation.
No, I understand.
If you can maybe remember, if you go on the MyKW intranet where the calendar is, that's where you sign up for classes so that we can get you stuff in advance. If you're taking notes, it would be easier if you had the information in front of you. So,
okay. No, I appreciate it.
Just try and sign up, and then we can get you whatever we need to beforehand. So,
okay. I had two other questions for you, Brad.
Sure.
One thing is, since I can't do the DocuSign thing, I'm having a lot of issues with that. Okay. And I've been back and forth with these people a lot.
Okay.
Can you send me the contracts at least and the CIS in a PDF form so I could download it on my computer, so at least I have it.
Okay. So you want
Well,
the contract of, the agreement of sale.
yeah, and any kind of forms that I would need to purchase or
Okay.
on the selling side.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, just so I can actually download, because I think I can, when I go to that in the room, I can go to that click, and rather than put DocuSign down, I could just go to my computer, you know?
Okay. Right. Now, you have not been able to get any Delaware forms at all through DocuSign, except
I
AW.
can get several, but not the ones that are really pertinent. There's a lot of addendums I can get to, but that's it.
Okay. You get the KW 785 forms that are in there. You don't get the DAR forms.
No, I think I click on 785 and only like 2 forms.
Right. Those
come
are
up.
our local forms.
Okay.
You're not getting the state forms, which are the agreements of sale and the
No,
home inspection and all that. Okay.
no, I'm getting some addendums. I am getting addendums, but I'm not getting like when you list the property. I'm not getting
Okay.
when you put a sales contract in.
All right. When you eventually get in there, you'll see the difference, the different codings, and the one is DAR and the other one's KW 785. So, did you try to contact your MCA?
My MCA meeting up here in New Jersey?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Could you and explain that situation? Because I don't know if there's a button that they need to push.
Oh,
So,
who's the MCA down in Delaware?
Darlene Sanford,
Darlene. Okay.
that's who you did all your paperwork with, I would imagine.
With Charlene.
Darlene.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. And every time they try to do it and they send the support out, they say they're not having an issue. But then when I go in, I can't do it. So it's, I was almost going to wait until I get down to Delaware and see somebody down there in tech. I don't know if that would help or not.
Okay. The one thing that I'll tell Sandy Green that you're having this issue because we had this recently. There's something, you've got to link your NERDS number
Yeah.
in signing up for DocuSign. So I don't want to screw up what you've already signed up with in New Jersey. That's
Yeah,
where
no,
your
yeah.
MCA up there might be able to help you.
Right.
Before we start, having you get another DocuSign account.
Right.
I'm not involved in that part of it, so that's why I don't want to
Right.
tell you to
Yeah,
go ahead and do that. So,
and Sandy was trying to be very helpful because I was with her for around a half hour, but then she said to contact certain people
right.
at I think it was KW Support or DocuSign or both. Actually, I did, but
Well,
I didn't get anywhere.
Right,
know?
we've got agents that are in multiple market centers. So, and I do know that a couple of them have had some issues, but we just need to get this figured out for you.
Okay,
So,
but maybe in the meantime you could
Yep.
email those other ones. So at least I like to look at the documents anyway and go over things or enter false names and stuff just to get some practice.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Okay.
Other than your DocuSign problems, if you have anything else, just, email me or call me and I'll be glad to get what you need if I can. And
Okay, Brad.
just congratulations and thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. These are really informative. I really appreciate it.
Good. All right.
All right, Brad. Thanks so much.